Question 1. Implementation of a new AI-driven feature within Broadcom's networking hardware requires careful consideration of its potential impact on data privacy and security. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory expectations for responsible innovation? Option A. Proceed with the feature's development and integration, planning to address any potential regulatory concerns through post-launch software updates if they arise. Option B. Rely on the inherent security of Broadcom's existing hardware architecture to ensure compliance, assuming the new AI feature will not introduce new vulnerabilities. Option C. Conduct a thorough regulatory impact assessment and develop mitigation strategies before the feature is integrated into the product roadmap, seeking input from legal and compliance teams throughout the process. Option D. Initiate a regulatory review only after the feature has been fully developed and is ready for market release, to minimize development delays. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough regulatory impact assessment and develop mitigation strategies before the feature is integrated into the product roadmap, seeking input from legal and compliance teams throughout the process. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for rapid innovation and the imperative to adhere to established regulatory frameworks designed to protect consumers and ensure market integrity. Broadcom, as a technology leader, must navigate this tension by prioritizing compliance without stifling its competitive edge. The core difficulty lies in interpreting and applying complex regulations to novel technological advancements, requiring a nuanced understanding of both the spirit and letter of the law. Careful judgment is essential to avoid both regulatory penalties and reputational damage. The correct approach involves a proactive and comprehensive review process that integrates regulatory compliance from the earliest stages of product development. This means establishing clear internal guidelines that align with the specified regulatory framework, conducting thorough risk assessments for new technologies, and seeking expert legal and compliance counsel. This approach is best professional practice because it demonstrates a commitment to responsible innovation and minimizes the likelihood of future regulatory issues. Specifically, it adheres to the principles of due diligence and good corporate governance, which are implicitly or explicitly mandated by regulatory bodies overseeing technology companies. By embedding compliance into the development lifecycle, Broadcom can identify and mitigate potential issues before they become significant problems, thereby safeguarding its operations and reputation. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed to market over regulatory scrutiny is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the legal and ethical obligations to ensure products are safe, secure, and compliant with all applicable laws. Such an approach risks significant fines, product recalls, and severe damage to Broadcom's brand trust. Another incorrect approach, which relies solely on post-launch patching or reactive compliance measures, is also flawed. This demonstrates a lack of foresight and a failure to proactively manage regulatory risk. While reactive measures might address immediate issues, they do not prevent the initial violation and can still lead to penalties for non-compliance during the product's initial release. Furthermore, it suggests a culture that views compliance as an afterthought rather than an integral part of business operations. A third incorrect approach, which involves seeking legal counsel only when a regulatory inquiry is received, is a critical failure in professional decision-making. This reactive stance exposes Broadcom to unnecessary risk and suggests a lack of commitment to proactive compliance. Regulatory frameworks are designed to be preventative, and seeking guidance only after a problem arises is a dereliction of professional duty and a failure to uphold the principles of responsible corporate citizenship. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, thoroughly understand the relevant regulatory framework. Second, establish cross-functional teams involving legal, compliance, engineering, and product management to assess new technologies against these regulations. Third, implement a robust risk assessment and mitigation strategy. Fourth, maintain open communication channels with regulatory bodies and seek expert advice proactively. Finally, foster a company culture that values and prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. Question 2. Compliance review shows that a marketing team at Broadcom is requesting access to detailed customer interaction logs to identify trends for a new campaign. The team believes that analyzing all available logs will provide the most comprehensive insights. What is the most appropriate course of action for the data custodian at Broadcom? Option A. Consult with Broadcom's legal and compliance departments to determine the lawful basis for accessing and processing the customer interaction logs, ensuring adherence to all relevant data privacy regulations before proceeding with any analysis. Option B. Anonymize the customer interaction logs by removing obvious personal identifiers before providing them to the marketing team, without further verification of the anonymization's effectiveness. Option C. Provide the marketing team with unrestricted access to all customer interaction logs, assuming that internal company policy permits such access for marketing research. Option D. Proceed with the analysis of all available customer interaction logs, as the marketing team's need for comprehensive insights outweighs potential privacy concerns in this context. The correct answer is A. Consult with Broadcom's legal and compliance departments to determine the lawful basis for accessing and processing the customer interaction logs, ensuring adherence to all relevant data privacy regulations before proceeding with any analysis. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual at Broadcom to balance the immediate need for information with the stringent requirements of data privacy regulations. The pressure to deliver insights quickly can lead to shortcuts that violate legal and ethical obligations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that data is accessed and used only in ways that are permissible, and that the privacy of individuals is protected. The correct approach involves understanding the scope of the data request and identifying the specific legal basis for accessing and processing any personal data. This includes consulting with the legal and compliance teams at Broadcom to ensure adherence to all applicable regulations, such as those governing data privacy and information security. This approach is correct because it prioritizes legal compliance and ethical data handling, which are paramount in any business operation, especially within a technology company like Broadcom that handles vast amounts of data. It demonstrates a commitment to responsible data stewardship and mitigates the risk of significant legal penalties and reputational damage. An incorrect approach that involves directly accessing and analyzing all available customer data without first verifying the legal basis or obtaining necessary consents would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This bypasses established data protection frameworks and could lead to violations of privacy laws, resulting in fines and loss of customer trust. Another incorrect approach, such as anonymizing data superficially without a robust understanding of re-identification risks, also poses a regulatory failure. True anonymization requires rigorous technical and procedural safeguards to prevent individuals from being identified, and a failure to achieve this can still result in privacy breaches. Finally, an approach that relies solely on internal company policy without cross-referencing external legal requirements would be an ethical failure, as internal policies must align with and often exceed legal minimums. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the data request's purpose and scope. This should be followed by an immediate assessment of potential data privacy implications. Consulting with legal and compliance departments early in the process is crucial. If personal data is involved, professionals must identify the lawful basis for processing it, ensure appropriate consent mechanisms are in place, and implement robust security measures. The principle of data minimization should guide the process, ensuring only the necessary data is accessed and processed for the stated purpose. Question 3. During the evaluation of a new software development project at Broadcom, a project manager is eager to meet aggressive launch deadlines. They are considering whether to proceed with certain features that might have implications for data privacy regulations without a full review from Broadcom's legal and compliance departments, believing they can address any issues post-launch. Which approach best upholds regulatory compliance and professional ethics for Broadcom? Option A. Proceed with the development of features that may have regulatory implications, assuming that any issues can be rectified after the product launch. Option B. Rely solely on Broadcom's existing internal policies, assuming they are comprehensive enough to cover all aspects of the new project's regulatory landscape. Option C. Conduct a brief, informal consultation with a junior member of the legal team to get a quick opinion on the features. Option D. Proactively engage Broadcom's legal and compliance teams early in the project to identify and address all potential regulatory requirements and risks before feature implementation. The correct answer is D. Proactively engage Broadcom's legal and compliance teams early in the project to identify and address all potential regulatory requirements and risks before feature implementation. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual at Broadcom to navigate the complex interplay between internal company policies, potential ethical considerations, and the overarching regulatory framework governing the technology sector. The pressure to deliver a project quickly can create a temptation to overlook or minimize compliance steps, which could have significant legal and reputational consequences for Broadcom. Careful judgment is required to balance project timelines with the imperative of adhering to all applicable regulations. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and engaging with the relevant legal and compliance teams at Broadcom early in the project lifecycle. This ensures that all potential regulatory hurdles are understood and addressed from the outset, minimizing the risk of non-compliance. This aligns with best practices in corporate governance and risk management, which emphasize a proactive, integrated approach to regulatory adherence. Specifically, it reflects the principle of compliance by design, where regulatory considerations are embedded into the development and deployment processes. This approach is ethically sound as it prioritizes the integrity of Broadcom's operations and its commitment to operating within legal boundaries. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over due diligence by proceeding without explicit legal and compliance review fails to uphold the company's responsibility to operate lawfully. This could lead to violations of regulations, such as those pertaining to data privacy, intellectual property, or cybersecurity, depending on the nature of the project. Such a failure exposes Broadcom to significant fines, legal action, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, which involves seeking only a superficial review from legal and compliance without providing them with complete information or engaging in a thorough discussion, is also professionally unacceptable. This approach creates a false sense of security and can lead to overlooking critical compliance issues. It demonstrates a lack of commitment to genuine regulatory adherence and can be seen as an attempt to circumvent proper oversight. A further incorrect approach, which assumes that existing internal policies are sufficient without verifying their applicability to the new project or seeking updated guidance, is risky. Regulatory landscapes evolve, and internal policies may not always keep pace. Relying on outdated or inapplicable policies can result in unintentional noncompliance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment that includes identifying all potential regulatory touchpoints for a project. This should be followed by a clear escalation path to engage with the appropriate internal subject matter experts, including legal and compliance. Open communication, thorough documentation of compliance efforts, and a commitment to addressing any identified issues before proceeding are paramount. Professionals should always err on the side of caution when regulatory compliance is in question, understanding that the long-term health and reputation of Broadcom depend on it. Question 4. Quality control measures reveal that a critical software component for a new Broadcom networking product has passed initial functional tests, but has not undergone the full suite of stress and interoperability testing required by internal quality guidelines and potentially relevant FCC regulations for electromagnetic interference. The product launch is imminent, and there is significant market pressure to release it on schedule. Which of the following approaches best upholds regulatory compliance and professional integrity for Broadcom? Option A. Proceed with the product launch as scheduled, relying on post-release monitoring and rapid patch deployment to address any emergent issues identified by customers. Option B. Authorize the engineering team to expedite the remaining tests by reducing the scope and number of test cases to meet the original launch deadline. Option C. Delay the product launch to complete all required stress and interoperability testing, ensuring comprehensive documentation of the validation process and adherence to FCC guidelines. Option D. Release the product with a disclaimer that certain functionalities may be unstable and subject to future updates, while initiating the full testing regimen concurrently. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the product launch as scheduled, relying on post-release monitoring and rapid patch deployment to address any emergent issues identified by customers. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a desire for rapid product deployment and the imperative to adhere to stringent regulatory compliance, particularly within the context of Broadcom's operations, which are subject to specific industry regulations. The need to balance innovation with robust quality assurance and regulatory adherence requires careful judgment to avoid potential legal repercussions, reputational damage, and compromised product integrity. The correct approach involves prioritizing comprehensive validation and documentation before product release, even if it introduces a delay. This aligns with best practices in regulated industries where thorough testing, risk assessment, and adherence to established quality management systems are paramount. Specifically, within the framework governing Broadcom's product development, assuming a U.S.-centric regulatory environment for this assessment, such as FDA regulations for medical devices or FCC regulations for telecommunications equipment, depending on the product line. This approach ensures that all design controls, risk management activities, and verification/validation processes are completed and documented according to established standards. This proactive stance minimizes the likelihood of post-market issues and demonstrates a commitment to product safety and efficacy, thereby satisfying regulatory expectations. An incorrect approach that bypasses or shortcuts critical validation steps before release is ethically and regulatorily unsound. Such an approach risks releasing a product that may not meet safety, performance, or interoperability standards, leading to potential recalls, fines, and loss of customer trust. It demonstrates a disregard for established quality management systems and regulatory requirements, which often mandate specific testing protocols and documentation for product approval. Another incorrect approach that relies solely on post-market feedback for identifying and rectifying issues without adequate pre-market validation is also problematic. While customer feedback is valuable for continuous improvement, it should not be the primary mechanism for ensuring initial product compliance and safety. This approach shifts the burden of quality assurance onto the end user and can result in significant harm or disruption if critical flaws are not identified until after widespread deployment. Further incorrect approach that prioritizes speed to market over documented evidence of compliance fails to recognize that regulatory approval is often contingent upon verifiable proof of adherence to standards. Without proper documentation, even if a product functions correctly, it may be deemed non-compliant, leading to market access issues. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk-based approach. This includes 1. Clearly identifying all applicable regulatory requirements and internal quality standards. 2. Conducting a thorough risk assessment of potential issues that could arise from expediting the release. 3. Evaluating the impact of any delays against business objectives, but always prioritizing compliance and safety. 4. Ensuring that all necessary validation, verification, and documentation activities are completed and signed off by appropriate personnel before product launch. 5. Establishing clear communication channels with all stakeholders regarding timelines and compliance status. Question 5. Performance analysis shows a Broadcom customer is requesting a specific configuration change for a product that appears to fall outside of standard-approved parameters. The customer is expressing urgency and implies that a competitor offers a similar customization. The sales representative is under pressure to close the deal. Which of the following approaches best balances customer needs with Broadcom's regulatory and ethical obligations? Option A. Agree to the configuration change, but add a disclaimer to the contract stating that Broadcom is not liable for any performance issues arising from the non-standard configuration. Option B. Document the customer's request thoroughly. Research Broadcom's internal policies and relevant regulations regarding such deviations, and consult with Broadcom's engineering and compliance teams to determine if a compliant solution can be developed or if an exception can be granted. Option C. Immediately agree to the customer's requested configuration change to secure the sale, assuming it is a minor deviation and unlikely to cause issues. Option D. Politely inform the customer that the requested configuration is not supported and explore alternative standard configurations that meet their core business needs. Correct answer is C. Immediately agree to the customer's requested configuration change to secure the sale, assuming it is a minor deviation and unlikely to cause issues. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a desire to quickly resolve a customer issue and the imperative to adhere to Broadcom's established compliance policies and regulatory requirements. The pressure to deliver a positive customer experience can sometimes lead to shortcuts that, while seemingly efficient in the short term, can have significant long-term consequences for the company, including regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and erosion of customer trust. Careful judgment is required to balance customer satisfaction with the non-negotiable need for compliance. The correct approach involves meticulously documenting the customer's request and the proposed resolution, ensuring it aligns with Broadcom's internal policies and any applicable regulations. This includes verifying that the proposed solution does not involve any prohibited activities or misrepresentations. By following established procedures and seeking appropriate internal approvals, if the situation deviates from standard practice, the employee demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory adherence. This proactive stance protects both the customer and Broadcom from potential future issues. An incorrect approach that involves immediately agreeing to the customer's request without proper verification or documentation is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for internal controls and regulatory mandates, potentially leading to unauthorized actions or commitments that Broadcom cannot fulfill. Such an approach risks violating data privacy regulations, misrepresenting product capabilities, or engaging in unfair business practices, all of which carry severe penalties. Another incorrect approach, which is to dismiss the customer's request outright without exploring compliance solutions, is also professionally flawed. While it avoids potential compliance breaches, it fails to meet the customer's needs and can lead to dissatisfaction and loss of business. Professionals should strive to find a resolution within the bounds of policy and regulation, rather than simply rejecting the request. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, fully understand the customer's request and the underlying need. Second, consult Broadcom's internal policies, procedures, and any relevant regulatory guidelines to determine the permissible course of action. Third, if the request falls outside standard procedures or raises compliance concerns, escalate the issue to the appropriate internal stakeholders, e.g., legal, compliance, management, for guidance and approval. Finally, communicate the approved resolution clearly and transparently to the customer, ensuring all actions are properly documented. Question 6. The audit findings indicate that a critical data request from an external auditor for Broadcom's compliance review has been delayed due to internal processing bottlenecks. A senior manager is pressuring for an immediate resolution, suggesting direct communication with the external auditor to expedite the data transfer, bypassing the standard internal review and approval process for such requests. Option A. Directly contact the external auditor to arrange for the expedited transfer of the requested data, bypassing internal review to satisfy the senior manager's request. Option B. Provide the senior manager with a subset of the data that is readily available, with a promise to follow up with the remaining information later to show progress. Option C. Inform the senior manager that the request cannot be fulfilled due to internal bottlenecks and suggest they speak directly with the external auditor to manage expectations. Option D. Immediately escalate the delay to the internal audit liaison and relevant compliance officers, providing a clear timeline for when the data will be ready, while strictly adhering to all internal data handling and disclosure policies. The correct answer is D. Immediately escalate the delay to the internal audit liaison and relevant compliance officers, providing a clear timeline for when the data will be ready, while strictly adhering to all internal data handling and disclosure policies. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual at Broadcom to balance the immediate need for information with the strict adherence to regulatory compliance and internal policies. The pressure to deliver results quickly can create a temptation to bypass established procedures, which could lead to significant legal and reputational risks for Broadcom. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions taken are both effective and compliant. The correct approach involves meticulously documenting all communications and data requests, ensuring they align with the scope of the audit and are handled through authorized channels. This demonstrates a commitment to transparency and accountability, which are fundamental principles in regulatory compliance. Specifically, adhering to the established data request protocols ensures that Broadcom's internal controls are respected, and that any information shared is done so in a manner that protects sensitive data and complies with relevant regulations. This proactive documentation also serves as a defense against potential accusations of impropriety or noncompliance. An incorrect approach that involves directly contacting external parties without prior authorization or bypassing the designated audit liaison would be professionally unacceptable. This action bypasses established internal controls and could lead to the unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information, potentially violating data privacy regulations and internal Broadcom policies. It also undermines the integrity of the audit process by creating an uncontrolled flow of information. Another incorrect approach, such as providing incomplete or selectively curated information to expedite the process, is also professionally unsound. This can mislead the auditors, compromise the accuracy of the audit findings, and potentially conceal material issues. Such actions could be interpreted as an attempt to obstruct the audit or misrepresent the company's compliance status, leading to severe regulatory penalties and damage to Broadcom's reputation. The professional reasoning framework for such situations should prioritize adherence to established policies and regulations above expediency. When faced with a request that seems to deviate from standard procedures, the professional should first consult internal guidelines and the designated audit contact. If clarification is needed, it should be sought through official channels. The decision-making process should involve a risk assessment, considering the potential consequences of both compliance and non-compliance, and always defaulting to the most legally and ethically sound path. Question 7. The risk matrix shows several high-risk items related to data security and intellectual property protection for Broadcom. Which of the following represents the most appropriate immediate response based on best practices in risk management and regulatory compliance for this assessment's jurisdiction? Option A. Conduct a superficial review of the high-risk items and implement only minor, low-cost adjustments without a full assessment of their effectiveness. Option B. Defer action on the high-risk items, citing potential resource limitations, and focus on addressing low-risk items that are easier to manage. Option C. Document the high-risk items as noted but take no immediate action, assuming that the probability of these risks materializing is low. Option D. Implement comprehensive and immediate mitigation strategies for all identified high-risk items, allocating necessary resources and establishing clear accountability. The correct answer is D. Implement comprehensive and immediate mitigation strategies for all identified high-risk items, allocating necessary resources and establishing clear accountability. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual at Broadcom to interpret a risk matrix and determine the appropriate response, balancing potential threats with resource allocation and regulatory compliance. The challenge lies in moving beyond a superficial understanding of risk levels to a nuanced application of best practices and adherence to the specific regulatory framework governing Broadcom's operations within the designated jurisdiction for this assessment. A key aspect is understanding that risk mitigation is not a one-size-fits-all solution and must be tailored to the specific context and potential impact. The correct approach involves prioritizing the identified high-risk items for immediate and comprehensive mitigation strategies. This aligns with best practices in risk management, which dictate that resources and attention should be focused on the most critical threats to prevent significant adverse outcomes. From a regulatory perspective, this approach demonstrates due diligence and a proactive stance in safeguarding the company's assets, reputation, and compliance obligations. It reflects a commitment to adhering to the spirit and letter of the law by addressing potential violations or disruptions before they materialize, thereby minimizing the likelihood of regulatory penalties or operational failures. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the high-risk items due to perceived resource constraints without a formal, documented assessment of alternative mitigation strategies or a clear rationale for deferral. This failure to act on identified high risks constitutes a significant regulatory and ethical lapse. It suggests a disregard for the potential consequences outlined in the risk matrix and a potential violation of compliance mandates that require proactive risk management. Another incorrect approach would be to focus solely on low-risk items, assuming they are easier to manage, while neglecting the high-risk areas. This demonstrates a misunderstanding of risk prioritization and a failure to meet the fundamental objective of risk management, which is to protect the organization from its most significant threats. Such an approach could lead to severe operational disruptions or regulatory sanctions if a high-risk event occurs. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the risk matrix and its implications. This involves identifying the highest priority risks and then evaluating potential mitigation strategies based on their effectiveness, cost, and feasibility. The decision should be informed by the specific regulatory framework applicable to Broadcom, ensuring that all actions taken are compliant and ethically sound. Documentation of the decision-making process, including the rationale for chosen mitigation strategies and any deferred actions, is crucial for demonstrating accountability and due diligence. Question 8. The risk matrix shows a high probability of securing a significant new contract for Broadcom with a foreign partner, contingent on the timely delivery of advanced semiconductor technology. However, the matrix also flags potential risks related to international export controls and data privacy regulations that may apply to the technology transfer and subsequent data handling. What is the most prudent course of action for Broadcom's legal and compliance team to ensure regulatory adherence? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive review of all applicable international export control and data privacy regulations. Verify the foreign partner's compliance posture and ensure the contract includes specific clauses addressing these regulatory requirements before signing. Option B. Proceed with contract finalization, assuming the foreign partner has robust internal compliance mechanisms that will manage any applicable export control and data privacy requirements. Option C. Prioritize the immediate signing of the contract to capitalize on the business opportunity, deferring a detailed review of export control and data privacy implications until after the agreement is executed. Option D. Rely on the sales team's assurance that the partner is reputable and has no history of regulatory violations, and therefore, extensive compliance checks are unnecessary for this specific transaction. The correct answer is B. Proceed with contract finalization, assuming the foreign partner has robust internal compliance mechanisms that will manage any applicable export control and data privacy requirements. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an employee at Broadcom to balance the company's immediate business objectives with its long-term regulatory compliance obligations. The pressure to secure a new contract, especially one involving sensitive technology, can create an environment where shortcuts or overlooking critical compliance steps might seem appealing. However, regulatory frameworks, particularly those governing technology and data handling, are designed to protect national security, intellectual property, and fair competition. Failing to adhere to these frameworks can lead to severe penalties, reputational damage, and loss of trust from both customers and regulatory bodies. Careful judgment is required to ensure that business goals are pursued ethically and legally. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and addressing all relevant regulatory requirements before finalizing the contract. This means conducting thorough due diligence on the partner's compliance posture, ensuring all necessary export controls and data privacy stipulations are integrated into the agreement, and seeking legal counsel to interpret and apply complex regulations. This approach is correct because it aligns with the fundamental principles of regulatory compliance, which mandate adherence to all applicable laws and guidelines. Specifically, for a company like Broadcom operating in the technology sector, this would involve understanding and complying with regulations such as those governing export controls e.g. EAR in the U.S., data protection e.g. GDPR if applicable to data processing, and potentially industry-specific standards. Proactive compliance mitigates risk, demonstrates corporate responsibility, and builds a sustainable business model. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the contract without fully understanding or verifying the partner's compliance with export control regulations. This is a significant regulatory failure because it exposes Broadcom to the risk of violating export control laws, which can result in substantial fines, debarment from future contracts, and even criminal charges. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that the partner's existing certifications are sufficient without independent verification or specific contractual assurances. This is an ethical and regulatory failure, as it relies on assumptions rather than due diligence, potentially leading to non-compliance if the partner's certifications are outdated, misinterpreted, or do not cover the specific scope of the proposed contract. Finally, Prioritizing the speed of contract finalization over thorough regulatory review is a critical error. This demonstrates a disregard for legal obligations and can lead to the company entering into an agreement that is fundamentally non-compliant, creating long-term liabilities. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes risk assessment and mitigation through a compliance-first lens. This involves 1. Identifying all potential regulatory touchpoints relevant to the transaction. 2. Conducting thorough due diligence on all parties involved, with a specific focus on their compliance history and current posture. 3. Consulting with legal and compliance experts to interpret regulations and draft appropriate contractual clauses. 4. Implementing internal controls and review processes to ensure ongoing adherence. 5. Documenting all compliance efforts and decisions. This systematic approach ensures that business objectives are met without compromising legal and ethical standards. Question 9. The risk matrix shows a moderate risk associated with accessing certain customer demographic data for a new marketing campaign at Broadcom. The data is readily available through an internal system, but the specific purpose for accessing it for this campaign has not been explicitly documented or approved by the Data Governance Committee. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory compliance and ethical data handling practices for Broadcom? Option A. Immediately access the data and begin the campaign, then inform the Data Governance Committee of the action taken. Option B. Halt all data access for the campaign and await explicit written approval from the Data Governance Committee, even if it delays the campaign launch. Option C. Initiate a formal request to the Data Governance Committee to clarify the specific permissible uses of this demographic data for marketing campaigns and seek approval before accessing it. Option D. Proceed with accessing the data as it is readily available and the risk is only moderate, assuming the marketing team will use it responsibly. The correct answer is D. Proceed with accessing the data as it is readily available and the risk is only moderate, assuming the marketing team will use it responsibly. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual at Broadcom to balance the immediate need for information with the imperative to adhere to strict regulatory frameworks governing data handling and privacy. The difficulty lies in recognizing that while the information might seem innocuous or directly relevant to a business objective, its acquisition and use are governed by specific rules designed to protect individuals and the company from legal and reputational damage. Careful judgment is required to avoid overstepping boundaries, even with good intentions. The correct approach involves proactively seeking clarification and guidance from the designated compliance or legal department before proceeding. This demonstrates a commitment to regulatory adherence and ethical conduct. By engaging with the appropriate internal experts, the individual ensures that any action taken aligns with Broadcom's policies and relevant regulations, such as those pertaining to data privacy and information security. This approach mitigates risk by preventing potential violations and fostering a culture of compliance. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the data acquisition without seeking proper authorization or understanding the regulatory implications. This could lead to violations of data privacy laws, such as GDPR or CCPA, depending on the jurisdiction relevant to Broadcom's operations and the data in question, or internal company policies. For instance, accessing or processing personal data without a legitimate business purpose or proper consent, or without ensuring adequate security measures, constitutes a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that because the data is readily available or seems useful, it can be freely used. This overlooks the principle of data minimization and purpose limitation, which are core tenets of many data protection regulations. It also fails to consider potential downstream risks, such as data breaches or misuse, which could result in severe penalties for Broadcom and damage its reputation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding and adhering to regulatory requirements. This involves 1. Identifying potential risks and regulatory touchpoints associated with a proposed action. 2. Consulting internal policies and relevant external regulations. 3. Seeking expert advice from legal, compliance, or data privacy teams when uncertainty exists. 4. Documenting the decision-making process and any approvals received. This systematic approach ensures that actions are not only efficient but also legally sound and ethically responsible. Question 10. The evaluation methodology shows that Broadcom is considering several approaches to assess the potential risks associated with its upcoming cloud-based service offering. Which approach best aligns with robust risk management principles for a technology company in a regulated market? Option A. A review of past incidents within Broadcom's product history to identify recurring issues and assume similar risks will materialize. Option B. A rapid assessment focused on identifying the most obvious and immediate risks to minimize time and resource expenditure. Option C. A comprehensive risk assessment framework that includes identification of potential threats, analysis of their likelihood and impact, and evaluation of mitigation strategies, incorporating both qualitative and quantitative data. Option D. A survey of industry thought leaders to gather anecdotal evidence on potential challenges without formal data analysis. The correct answer is C. A comprehensive risk assessment framework that includes identification of potential threats, analysis of their likelihood and impact, and evaluation of mitigation strategies, incorporating both qualitative and quantitative data. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Broadcom, as a technology company operating in a highly regulated environment, must ensure its risk assessment processes are robust and compliant. The challenge lies in selecting the most appropriate methodology for evaluating potential risks associated with a new product launch, balancing thoroughness with efficiency, and adhering to any applicable regulatory frameworks that govern risk management in the technology sector. Careful judgment is required to avoid both underestimation and overestimation of risks, which could lead to financial losses, reputational damage, or regulatory penalties. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that systematically identifies, analyzes, and evaluates potential risks. This methodology is professionally sound because it provides a structured framework for understanding the likelihood and impact of various risks. By considering both qualitative and quantitative factors, it allows for informed decision-making regarding risk mitigation strategies. This aligns with general principles of good corporate governance and risk management, which are often implicitly or explicitly required by regulatory bodies overseeing technology companies to ensure product safety, data security, and market integrity. While specific Broadcom internal guidelines would be paramount, a robust, multifaceted risk assessment is universally recognized as best practice. An approach that focuses solely on historical data, without considering emerging threats or novel risks, would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from an inability to adapt to the dynamic nature of the technology landscape, potentially overlooking new vulnerabilities or market shifts. It also risks violating regulatory expectations that demand forward-looking risk management. An approach that prioritizes speed and cost-effectiveness above all else, potentially by skipping critical analysis steps or relying on superficial evaluations, would also be professionally flawed. This can lead to the underestimation of significant risks, resulting in inadequate mitigation plans. Such an approach could contravene regulatory requirements for due diligence and prudent risk management, exposing Broadcom to unforeseen liabilities. A methodology that relies exclusively on expert opinion without any empirical validation or structured analysis might be considered less robust. While expert insights are valuable, an over-reliance on subjective judgment without a systematic framework can introduce bias and may not adequately capture all potential risks, potentially falling short of the rigorous standards expected in regulated industries. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific context of the risk being assessed, including the nature of the product, the target market, and the relevant regulatory environment. This should be followed by selecting a risk assessment methodology that is appropriate in scope and depth. The process should involve clear documentation of identified risks, their potential impact, and proposed mitigation strategies. Regular review and updates to the risk assessment are crucial to ensure its continued relevance and effectiveness. Question 11. Investigation of potential regulatory compliance risks for Broadcom's upcoming semiconductor product launch requires a thorough and proactive approach. Which of the following best describes the most professionally sound method for conducting this risk assessment? Option A. Prioritize the assessment based solely on projected market demand and competitive pressures, assuming regulatory compliance will be addressed if issues arise post-launch. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of all applicable regulations, engage legal and compliance experts, and develop a risk matrix to identify, assess, and prioritize potential compliance issues before product release. Option C. Rely on informal discussions with industry peers and anecdotal information to gauge potential regulatory concerns without formal documentation. Option D. Defer the detailed regulatory risk assessment until after the product has been launched and initial market feedback is received. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive review of all applicable regulations, engage legal and compliance experts, and develop a risk matrix to identify, assess, and prioritize potential compliance issues before product release. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an assessment of potential risks associated with a new product launch at Broadcom, specifically concerning its compliance with relevant regulations. The challenge lies in identifying and evaluating these risks proactively to prevent future legal, financial, and reputational damage. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between genuine regulatory concerns and speculative issues, ensuring that resources are allocated effectively to address the most critical risks. The correct approach involves a systematic and comprehensive risk assessment process that aligns with established regulatory compliance frameworks. This approach is right because it prioritizes identifying potential violations of applicable laws and regulations before they occur. By engaging relevant stakeholders, including legal and compliance teams, and utilizing a structured methodology to evaluate the likelihood and impact of identified risks, Broadcom can implement appropriate mitigation strategies. This proactive stance is ethically sound and aligns with the principle of acting with due diligence and integrity, as expected under general business ethics and regulatory expectations for publicly traded companies. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on market demand without considering regulatory implications is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for legal obligations, potentially leading to the launch of a non-compliant product. Such an oversight could result in significant fines, product recalls, and damage to Broadcom's reputation, violating the duty to operate within the legal framework. Another incorrect approach that involves deferring risk assessment until after the product launch is also professionally flawed. This reactive strategy ignores the fundamental principle of proactive compliance. Waiting for issues to arise increases the likelihood of substantial penalties and remediation costs, demonstrating a lack of foresight and a failure to uphold the company's responsibility to adhere to regulations from the outset. A third incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or informal opinions rather than a structured assessment is professionally unsound. This method lacks the rigor necessary for effective risk management and compliance. It can lead to misidentification of risks or an underestimation of their severity, leaving Broadcom vulnerable to regulatory scrutiny and potential enforcement actions. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk management framework. This framework typically includes identifying potential risks, assessing their likelihood and impact, prioritizing risks based on severity, developing mitigation plans, and continuously monitoring and reviewing the effectiveness of these plans. Engaging cross-functional teams, seeking expert advice, and maintaining thorough documentation are crucial steps in ensuring robust risk assessment and compliance. Question 12. The evaluation methodology shows that Broadcom is considering several approaches to assess the risks associated with its upcoming product launch. Which approach best aligns with robust risk management principles and regulatory expectations for technology company? Option A. A risk assessment that prioritizes rapid identification of the most obvious risks to expedite the product launch timeline, with a less detailed analysis of less probable but potentially severe risks. Option B. A risk assessment that primarily focuses on quantifying the potential financial losses associated with known historical risks, assuming no significant new threats will emerge. Option C. A risk assessment that relies solely on the subjective opinions of senior management regarding potential risks, without formal data collection or structured analysis. Option D. A comprehensive risk assessment that combines qualitative analysis of potential threats with quantitative modeling of financial impacts, and includes scenario planning for emerging technological and regulatory changes. The correct answer is D. A comprehensive risk assessment that combines qualitative analysis of potential threats with quantitative modeling of financial impacts, and includes scenario planning for emerging technological and regulatory changes. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Broadcom, as a technology company operating in a highly regulated sector, must ensure its risk assessment processes are robust and compliant with relevant laws and guidelines. The challenge lies in selecting the most appropriate methodology for assessing risks associated with a new product launch, balancing innovation with regulatory adherence and potential financial implications. Careful judgment is required to avoid overlooking critical risks or implementing overly burdensome controls that stifle progress. The correct approach involves a comprehensive, multifaceted risk assessment that integrates qualitative and quantitative methods. This approach is best professional practice because it provides a holistic view of potential risks, allowing for informed decision-making. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and risk management, which are often implicitly or explicitly mandated by regulatory frameworks governing technology companies. Such frameworks typically require entities to identify, assess, and manage risks that could impact their operations, financial stability, and compliance. A thorough assessment ensures that Broadcom can proactively mitigate threats, protect its assets and reputation, and meet its legal and ethical obligations. An approach that solely focuses on financial impact would be professionally unacceptable because it neglects non-financial risks such as reputational damage, regulatory noncompliance, or operational disruptions, which can have significant downstream financial consequences. This failure to consider the full spectrum of risks is a direct contravention of sound risk management principles and could lead to breaches of regulatory requirements that mandate a broader risk perspective. An approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness would be professionally unacceptable. While efficiency is important, rushing a risk assessment can lead to the omission of critical risks, inadequate mitigation strategies, and ultimately, a higher likelihood of adverse events. This haste can result in non-compliance with regulations that require due diligence and a systematic approach to risk management, potentially exposing Broadcom to penalties and legal liabilities. An approach that relies exclusively on historical data without considering emerging threats would be professionally unacceptable. The technology landscape is dynamic, and new risks can arise rapidly. Ignoring these potential future threats based solely on past experiences is a failure of foresight and proactive risk management. Regulatory bodies often expect companies to demonstrate an awareness of evolving risks and to adapt their assessment methodologies accordingly. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk management framework. This framework typically includes defining the scope and objectives of the assessment, identifying potential risks across various categories: operational, financial, strategic, compliance, reputational, assessing the likelihood and impact of each identified risk, developing mitigation strategies, implementing controls, and continuously monitoring and reviewing the effectiveness of these measures. Professionals should always consider the specific regulatory environment in which their company operates and ensure that their risk assessment processes are designed to meet or exceed these requirements. Question 13. Benchmark analysis indicates that a Broadcom employee, while attending an industry conference, overhears a conversation between two senior executives from a publicly traded competitor. The conversation appears to reveal significant, non-public details about an upcoming product launch that is expected to dramatically impact the competitor's stock price. The employee recognizes the potential financial implications of this information. What is the most ethically and legally sound course of action for the Broadcom employee? Option A. Discuss the overheard information with other Broadcom colleagues who are not involved in investor relations or legal matters. Option B. Ignore the overheard information, assuming it is not relevant to Broadcom and therefore not a concern. Option C. Immediately refrain from trading any securities related to the competitor and report the overheard information to Broadcom's legal or compliance department. Option D. Use the overheard information to make a timely trade in the competitor's stock before the information becomes public. The correct answer is C. Immediately refrain from trading any securities related to the competitor and report the overheard information to Broadcom's legal or compliance department. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Broadcom due to the potential conflict between personal gain and the company's ethical standards and regulatory obligations. The core of the challenge lies in navigating the line between acceptable networking and insider trading, which is strictly prohibited by securities laws and company policy. Careful judgment is required to ensure all actions are transparent, compliant, and do not create even the appearance of impropriety. The correct approach involves prioritizing adherence to Broadcom's code of conduct and relevant securities regulations. This means refraining from acting on material non-public information, and instead reporting the situation to the appropriate internal channels, such as the legal or compliance department. This approach is ethically sound and legally compliant because it upholds the principles of fair markets and protects both the individual and the company from severe legal and reputational damage. It demonstrates a commitment to integrity and responsible corporate citizenship, aligning with the expectations set forth by regulatory bodies governing public companies. An incorrect approach would be to use the information to make a trade. This is a direct violation of insider trading laws, which carry severe penalties including hefty fines and imprisonment. It also breaches Broadcom's ethical guidelines and would likely result in termination of employment and significant reputational damage. Another incorrect approach would be to discuss the information with colleagues who are not authorized to receive it, as this could inadvertently spread material non-public information, creating a wider risk of insider trading and violating confidentiality obligations. A third incorrect approach would be to ignore the information and do nothing, as this fails to address a potential ethical breach and could be seen as tacit approval or negligence if the information later becomes public and leads to market activity. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential ethical or regulatory conflicts. This involves understanding company policies, relevant laws, and the potential consequences of different actions. When faced with uncertainty or a potential conflict, the safest and most ethical course of action is to consult with internal compliance or legal departments. This proactive approach ensures that decisions are made with full awareness of regulatory requirements and company standards, mitigating risks and upholding professional integrity. Question 14. When evaluating a potential client's needs for Broadcom's networking solutions and facing pressure to meet quarterly sales targets, what is the most ethically and regulatorily sound approach for a sales representative? Option A. Fully disclose all product capabilities and limitations, ensuring the client understands the solution's suitability for their specific requirements, even if it means the sale might not proceed immediately. Option B. Emphasize the most advanced features of the product and suggest it can address all potential future needs, even if some capabilities are not fully realized or are dependent on future upgrades. Option C. Focus solely on meeting the sales quota by presenting the product as a universal solution, assuming the client will discover any limitations post-purchase. Option D. Highlight the product's benefits while subtly omitting details about potential integration challenges or the need for additional, costly third-party software to achieve full functionality. The correct answer is A. Fully disclose all product capabilities and limitations, ensuring the client understands the solution's suitability for their specific requirements, even if it means the sale might not proceed immediately. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with ethical obligations and potential regulatory compliance. Pressure to meet aggressive sales targets can create an environment where shortcuts or misleading practices might seem appealing, but adhering to ethical standards and regulatory frameworks is paramount. Careful judgment is required to navigate the conflict between performance metrics and responsible conduct. The correct approach involves prioritizing accurate and transparent communication with clients, even if it means potentially losing a sale in the short term. This aligns with the ethical principle of honesty and integrity, and crucially, with regulatory requirements that prohibit misrepresentation or deceptive practices in sales. For Broadcom, this means ensuring that sales representatives provide clients with complete and truthful information about product capabilities, limitations, and pricing, thereby avoiding any actions that could be construed as misleading or fraudulent. This proactive stance on ethical sales practices safeguards both the client's trust and Broadcom's reputation, while also mitigating legal and regulatory risks. An incorrect approach that involves exaggerating product capabilities to secure a sale is ethically unsound and carries significant regulatory risk. Such behavior violates the principle of honesty and can lead to breaches of consumer protection laws or industry-specific regulations that mandate truthful advertising and sales practices. Another incorrect approach, which is to downplay or omit critical information about product limitations, is equally problematic. This omission constitutes a form of misrepresentation and can result in client dissatisfaction, contractual disputes, and potential legal action, as well as regulatory scrutiny for deceptive sales tactics. Finally, an approach that prioritizes meeting sales targets above all else, even at the expense of ethical conduct and regulatory compliance, demonstrates a severe lapse in professional judgment. This mindset can foster a culture of misconduct, leading to widespread ethical breaches and severe consequences for the company, including fines, reputational damage, and loss of business. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core ethical and regulatory considerations. This involves understanding the relevant laws and company policies, and then evaluating potential actions against these standards. When faced with a conflict, the priority should always be to uphold ethical principles and regulatory compliance, even if it means deviating from immediate financial objectives. Seeking guidance from supervisors or legal/compliance departments when in doubt is a critical step in ensuring responsible decision-making. Question 15. Benchmark analysis indicates that a Broadcom engineer, while reviewing internal project documentation for an upcoming product launch, stumbles upon detailed financial projections and market penetration strategies that are not yet publicly disclosed. This engineer also happens to be an avid investor and has been considering increasing their personal holdings in Broadcom stock. What is the most ethically and regulatorily sound course of action for the engineer? Option A. Proceed with purchasing additional Broadcom stock, believing that the information is not yet material enough to cause significant market impact. Option B. Make a small, speculative purchase of Broadcom stock to gauge the market's reaction to the upcoming launch based on the internal information. Option C. Immediately report the discovery of the non-public financial projections and market strategies to Broadcom's compliance department and refrain from any personal trading in Broadcom stock until the information is publicly disclosed or guidance is received. Option D. Discuss the discovered financial projections and market strategies with a trusted financial advisor to get their opinion on the potential stock performance before making any personal investment decisions. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the discovery of the non-public financial projections and market strategies to Broadcom's compliance department and refrain from any personal trading in Broadcom stock until the information is publicly disclosed or guidance is received. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Broadcom due to the inherent conflict between personal gain and the company's ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. The core difficulty lies in navigating the potential for insider information to influence personal investment decisions, which could lead to violations of securities laws and company policy. Careful judgment is required to uphold integrity and prevent any appearance of impropriety. The correct approach involves immediately reporting the potential insider information to the appropriate compliance or legal department at Broadcom. This upholds professional integrity by prioritizing transparency and adherence to regulatory frameworks. Specifically, this aligns with the principles of fair dealing and market integrity mandated by securities regulations, which prohibit trading on material, non-public information. Broadcom, as a publicly traded company, is subject to these regulations and has a duty to ensure its employees do not engage in insider trading. Reporting the information demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and proactive risk management, safeguarding both the individual and the company from legal repercussions and reputational damage. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the information and proceed with the stock purchase as planned. This fails to acknowledge the potential for the information to be material and non-public, thereby risking a violation of insider trading laws. It also disregards Broadcom's internal policies, which likely mandate reporting such situations. Another incorrect approach would be to discuss the information with colleagues before reporting it. This action could inadvertently spread the potentially material, non-public information, creating a wider circle of individuals who might be deemed to possess it and increasing the risk of a broader regulatory investigation. Finally, attempting to test the waters by making a small, speculative trade based on the information is also professionally unacceptable. This still constitutes trading on non-public information and is a direct violation of securities regulations and ethical standards. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. This involves recognizing potential conflicts of interest or the possession of material, non-public information, and then taking immediate steps to report it to the designated internal authority, e.g., compliance, legal, or HR. This proactive reporting mechanism allows the company to assess the information and provide guidance, ensuring that all actions taken are in accordance with legal and ethical standards. The guiding principle should always be to err on the side of caution and transparency when dealing with potentially sensitive information. Question 16. Analysis of a situation where a Broadcom engineer, while working on a confidential project, inadvertently overhears a conversation detailing a significant, unannounced product delay that is likely to negatively impact Broadcom's stock price. The engineer also holds a personal investment in Broadcom stock. What is the most ethically and legally sound course of action for the engineer? Option A. Immediately report the overheard information to Broadcom's compliance department and refrain from any personal trading until the information is publicly disclosed or deemed immaterial. Option B. Do nothing, as the information was overheard and not directly communicated to them, and they have no immediate intention to trade. Option C. Discuss the overheard information with a trusted friend who also invests in Broadcom stock, advising them to consider selling. Option D. Sell their personal Broadcom stock holdings to avoid potential losses before the news becomes public. The correct answer is A. Immediately report the overheard information to Broadcom's compliance department and refrain from any personal trading until the information is publicly disclosed or deemed immaterial. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Broadcom due to the inherent conflict between personal gain and the company's ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. The core difficulty lies in navigating the potential for insider information to influence personal investment decisions, which can lead to legal repercussions and reputational damage for both the individual and Broadcom. Careful judgment is required to uphold integrity and adhere to the strict regulatory framework governing financial markets and corporate conduct. The correct approach involves immediately reporting the potential insider information to the appropriate internal compliance department or legal counsel at Broadcom. This demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory adherence. By proactively disclosing the information, the employee allows Broadcom to manage the situation responsibly, preventing any appearance of impropriety or violation of securities laws. This aligns with the principles of corporate governance and the duty of all employees to act in the best interest of the company and its stakeholders, as mandated by regulations such as the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 and related SEC rules concerning insider trading. An incorrect approach would be to trade on the information before reporting it. This is a direct violation of insider trading laws, which prohibit trading securities based on material, non-public information. Such an action would expose the employee to severe penalties, including fines and imprisonment, and would also subject Broadcom to regulatory scrutiny and potential sanctions for failing to maintain adequate internal controls. Another incorrect approach would be to discuss the information with colleagues who are not authorized to receive it, even if no immediate trade is made. This constitutes a breach of confidentiality and can inadvertently lead to others engaging in prohibited trading activities, creating a wider compliance issue for Broadcom. It undermines the company's efforts to safeguard sensitive information and maintain market integrity. Finally, ignoring the information and taking no action is also an incorrect approach. While it may seem like a way to avoid direct involvement, it fails to address the ethical obligation to report potentially material information. This inaction could be interpreted as a passive acceptance of a situation that could harm the company or the market, and it misses an opportunity to uphold Broadcom's commitment to compliance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of company policies regarding confidential information and trading, as well as relevant securities regulations. When faced with potentially material non-public information, the immediate and primary step should always be to report it to the designated compliance or legal authority within the organization. This ensures that any subsequent actions are taken within the bounds of the law and ethical standards, protecting both the individual and the company. Question 17. Benchmark analysis indicates that Broadcom's sales team is under significant pressure to meet aggressive quarterly targets for a new software solution. A prospective client has expressed interest, but has also raised concerns about the solution's compatibility with their existing legacy systems, a known area of potential difficulty. A senior sales representative, eager to close the deal before the quarter ends, is considering assuring the client that compatibility issues are easily managed without providing specific technical details or acknowledging the potential for significant integration effort. What is the most ethically and regulatorily sound approach for the sales representative to take? Option A. Provide the client with a detailed technical white paper outlining potential integration challenges and recommended mitigation strategies, even if it means delaying the immediate closure of the deal. Option B. Assure the client that compatibility issues are easily managed and focus on the solution's benefits, deferring detailed technical discussions until after the contract is signed. Option C. Emphasize the urgency of the sales opportunity due to limited time offers and encourage the client to proceed with the purchase, promising to address any compatibility issues post-sale. Option D. Inform the client that the solution is not compatible with their legacy systems and suggest exploring alternative solutions, even if it means losing the current sales opportunity. The correct answer is A. Provide the client with a detailed technical white paper outlining potential integration challenges and recommended mitigation strategies, even if it means delaying the immediate closure of the deal. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with its long-term ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet aggressive sales targets can create an environment where employees feel compelled to cut corners, potentially leading to misrepresentation or misleading practices. Careful judgment is required to navigate this tension and ensure that all actions align with Broadcom's ethical standards and the relevant regulatory framework. The correct approach involves prioritizing accurate and transparent communication with potential clients, even if it means potentially losing a sale in the short term. This aligns with the ethical principle of honesty and integrity, and crucially, with the regulatory requirements of fair dealing and preventing deceptive practices. By providing complete and truthful information about product capabilities and limitations, Broadcom upholds its reputation and avoids potential legal repercussions. An incorrect approach that involves exaggerating product capabilities to secure a sale fails to uphold the ethical duty of honesty. It also violates regulatory principles that prohibit misleading advertising and deceptive sales tactics. Such actions can lead to customer dissatisfaction, reputational damage, and significant legal penalties for Broadcom. Another incorrect approach, which is to downplay or omit information about known product limitations to expedite the sales process, also constitutes a failure of ethical duty and regulatory compliance. This omission is a form of misrepresentation, as it creates an incomplete and therefore misleading picture for the client. This can result in clients making purchasing decisions based on false premises, leading to disputes and legal challenges. Finally, an incorrect approach that involves pressuring the sales team to meet targets regardless of ethical considerations or client needs fosters a toxic work environment and encourages unethical behavior. This prioritizes short-term financial gains over long-term sustainability and ethical conduct, which is a recipe for regulatory noncompliance and reputational damage. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of Broadcom's code of conduct and relevant regulations. When faced with conflicting pressures, professionals should always err on the side of transparency and ethical conduct. This involves seeking clarification from management or legal counsel if unsure about the appropriate course of action, and documenting all communications and decisions. The ultimate goal is to act in a manner that is both legally compliant and ethically sound, protecting both the client and the company. Question 18. Operational review demonstrates that a significant revenue recognition error has occurred in the reporting period for Broadcom's latest product launch, potentially overstating earnings by 5%. The team responsible for the review is under pressure to finalize the quarterly report by the deadline. Option A. Inform only the immediate supervisor of the error and await their instructions on how to proceed without involving other departments. Option B. Attempt to adjust the revenue recognition methodology for future periods to offset the current period's error without disclosing the past misstatement. Option C. Immediately escalate the revenue recognition error to the chief financial officer and the legal department, providing all supporting documentation, and halt the finalization of the report until the error is fully investigated and corrected according to accounting standards. Option D. Proceed with the current report as is, assuming the error is minor and will be corrected in the next quarter's filing. The correct answer is C. Immediately escalate the revenue recognition error to the chief financial officer and the legal department, providing all supporting documentation, and halt the finalization of the report until the error is fully investigated and corrected according to accounting standards. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with its long-term ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet targets can lead individuals to consider shortcuts or overlook potential risks, making careful judgment essential. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparency and adherence to established reporting procedures, even when it might lead to short-term negative consequences. This aligns with the ethical principles of integrity and accountability, and crucially, with regulatory frameworks that mandate accurate and timely disclosure of material information. By immediately escalating the issue through the proper channels, the employee upholds their duty to the company and its stakeholders, ensuring that any potential misstatements are identified and corrected proactively, thereby mitigating legal and reputational damage. An incorrect approach that involves attempting to fix the issue internally without proper disclosure risks violating accounting standards and securities regulations. This could be construed as an attempt to mislead investors or regulators, leading to severe penalties, including fines and legal action. Another incorrect approach, which is to ignore the discrepancy, represents a failure of due diligence and a breach of fiduciary duty. This inaction allows a potentially material misstatement to persist, exposing the company to significant regulatory scrutiny and loss of investor confidence. A third incorrect approach, which is to selectively disclose only favorable aspects of the situation, is a form of selective disclosure or insider trading, which is strictly prohibited and carries severe legal ramifications. Professionals facing such situations should employ a structured decision-making process. This involves first identifying the ethical and regulatory implications of the situation. Next, they should consult relevant company policies, codes of conduct, and applicable regulations. If uncertainty remains, seeking guidance from legal counsel, compliance officer, or senior management through established reporting lines is paramount. The ultimate goal is to act with integrity, transparency, and in compliance with all legal and ethical obligations. Question 19. Research into a new technology being developed by a competitor of Broadcom has revealed potential market-moving information that could significantly impact Broadcom's stock price. An employee at Broadcom, who is not directly involved in the competitive intelligence gathering for this specific project, learns of this information through informal channels. The employee believes this information, if acted upon quickly, could lead to a substantial personal investment gain. What is the most ethically and regulatorily sound course of action for the Broadcom employee? Option A. Disclose the information to a trusted colleague who is not employed by Broadcom and suggest they make the investment. Option B. Proactively disclose the potential conflict of interest and the nature of the information to Broadcom's compliance department and seek guidance before taking any action. Option C. Immediately make a personal investment based on the information, as it was not obtained through official company channels, and the employee believes it is not strictly material non-public information. Option D. Invest in the competitor's stock, but attempt to disguise the source of the information and the timing of the investment to avoid scrutiny. The correct answer is C. Immediately make a personal investment based on the information, as it was not obtained through official company channels, and the employee believes it is not strictly material non-public information. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Broadcom due to the potential conflict between personal gain and the company's ethical standards and regulatory obligations. The core difficulty lies in navigating the perception of impropriety and ensuring that all actions align with Broadcom's commitment to integrity and compliance, particularly concerning insider information. Careful judgment is required to uphold trust and prevent any appearance of unfair advantage. The correct approach involves proactively disclosing the potential conflict of interest to the appropriate internal channels at Broadcom and seeking guidance before acting on the information. This demonstrates a commitment to transparency, ethical conduct, and adherence to company policy and relevant regulations. By seeking approval and guidance, the employee ensures that their actions are scrutinized against Broadcom's internal compliance framework and any applicable regulatory requirements, thereby mitigating risk and maintaining professional integrity. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the investment without any disclosure. This failure stems from a disregard for Broadcom's internal policies on conflicts of interest and potentially insider trading regulations. Even if the information is not strictly material non-public information, acting on it without disclosure creates an appearance of impropriety and a breach of trust. Another incorrect approach would be to only disclose the information to a colleague for their investment. This is problematic as it still involves acting on potentially sensitive information without proper authorization and could lead to the colleague engaging in similar breaches of policy or regulation, and it does not absolve the employee of their responsibility to Broadcom. Finally, attempting to obscure the source of the information or the timing of the investment would be a severe ethical and regulatory failure, indicating intent to deceive and circumvent compliance procedures. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, adherence to company policy, and regulatory compliance. When faced with a situation that could be perceived as a conflict of interest or involve sensitive information, the first step is to identify the potential issue. Next, consult Broadcom's Code of Conduct and relevant policies regarding conflicts of interest in trading. If uncertainty remains, proactively seek clarification and guidance from the designated compliance or legal department. Documenting all communications and decisions is also crucial for demonstrating due diligence. Question 20. The monitoring system demonstrates unusual network activity originating from an employee's workstation at Broadcom, which could be indicative of either a security vulnerability or a legitimate, but perhaps unusual, work-related task. As an employee tasked with reviewing such alerts, what is the most appropriate initial course of action? Option A. Immediately initiate a formal disciplinary process against the employee based on the observed activity. Option B. Share the details of the alert with other colleagues to gauge their opinions on the employee's behavior. Option C. Ignore the alert as it is likely a false positive and does not warrant further attention. Option D. Conduct a thorough, objective investigation by consulting with the IT security team and reviewing Broadcom's internal policies on network usage and data privacy before taking any further steps. The correct answer is A. Immediately initiate a formal disciplinary process against the employee based on the observed activity. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an employee at Broadcom to balance the company's legitimate interest in monitoring its network and employee activity with the employee's right to privacy and the ethical implications of potentially misinterpreting or misusing sensitive information. The monitoring system's output is ambiguous, meaning a hasty or biased interpretation could lead to unfair accusations or breaches of trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any action taken is based on concrete evidence and adheres to established company policies and ethical standards. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective investigation that prioritizes factual evidence and adheres strictly to Broadcom's established policies on data privacy, acceptable use of company resources, and employee conduct. This approach is right because it upholds ethical principles of fairness and due process. By seeking clarification from IT security and reviewing relevant policies, the employee ensures that their actions are grounded in established procedures and not on speculation or personal bias. This aligns with the ethical obligation to act with integrity and to protect both the company's interests and the rights of individuals. An incorrect approach of immediately confronting the employee based on the ambiguous data is professionally unacceptable. This would constitute a premature accusation, potentially damaging the employee's reputation and morale without sufficient proof, violates the principle of due process, and could lead to a hostile work environment. Another incorrect approach of ignoring the data entirely, despite its potential implications for company security or policy adherence, is also professionally deficient. This failure to act could expose Broadcom to risks, such as security breaches or continued policy violations, and demonstrates a lack of diligence and responsibility. A third incorrect approach of sharing the ambiguous data with colleagues without proper authorization or a clear business need would be a breach of confidentiality and could lead to gossip and reputational damage for the employee involved, violating data privacy principles and fostering an untrustworthy work environment. Professionals in similar situations should employ a structured decision-making framework. 1. Identify the core issue and potential risks. 2. Consult relevant company policies and ethical guidelines. 3. Gather objective facts and seek clarification from appropriate departments, e.g., IT, HR, legal. 4. Avoid assumptions and personal biases. 5. Take action only when sufficient evidence supports a clear violation or risk following established procedures. 6. Maintain confidentiality and professionalism throughout the process.